morning, world. My name is Ida Sadu, and I am the proud managing director of a Different Booklist Cultural Centre, the People's Residence, located in the great city of Toronto at 777. I know you all said that with me, 777 Bathurst Street. You can't come to us in this time of the pandemic, but we are coming to you in the comfort of your home. June 19th. Oh my gosh, June 19th, Juneteenth. What a day in the world. What a place and a moment that we have come to. As Canadians, we often reference and refer to the Emancipation Proclamation Act under the British Empire, and we celebrate emancipation on August 1st, and it's a big celebration here. As a matter of fact, there are several efforts afoot by Senator Wanda Bernard, also Mary Sadler and the Ontario Black History Society, and I would say all African Canadians in this country, and our desire is to see August 1st declared a national holiday for Emancipation Day. But today, here we are at Juneteenth. And to start the morning off, I want to start with our land acknowledgement. The board and staff of a Different Booklist Cultural Centre acknowledge the original caretakers and storytellers of this land, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Métis, and the Wendat First Nations. We thank these mighty nations for allowing us to build our families, homes, and dreams in this land. We pledge to walk hand in hand with them as we journey on the road to self-determination and social justice. And then I want to follow up with what is in my heart. And these are the words of the famous poet Langston Hughes. The night is beautiful, so the faces of my people. The stars are beautiful, so the eyes of my people. Beautiful also is the sun. Beautiful also are the souls of my people. And having said that, on this day called Juneteenth, I have a number of guests who have, they got up early out of their bed because they knew that they were coming to the city of Toronto. And my guests who are Torontonians, or even if they're outside of this great city of Toronto right now, when that alarm bell rang, they said, I have to be on ABC, the People's Residence TV, to speak today about this moment called Juneteenth. There is an incredible dynamic Consul General that represents our great nation of Canada. She resides in the city of Atlanta. She is the Honorable Nadia Theodore. And Nadia Theodore was appointed as Consul General of Canada in Atlanta in September 2017. I also must say that when she landed in Atlanta, oh my stars, she also landed during the time of Hurricane Irma. And boy, did she hit the ground, and she went running so she could protect and serve the nationals of Canada and also to assist Americans with those efforts. Nadia is a language specialist, and prior to her appointment as Consul General, she served as Chief of Staff and Executive Director to Canada's Deputy Minister of International Trade. Ms. Theodore has also served at Canada's permanent mission to the World Trade Organization and at Canada's permanent mission to the United Nations. What we do know about the Honorable Nadia Theodore is that she's a woman who is very invested in having the Canadian conversation embedded in the American conversation, because as she sees it, we are your closest neighbors, closest allies, and also too, in the area of commerce, we are customers of each other. She is clear that Canadians will not be seen as cousins, but we see as the family in America. And with that introduction, I want to welcome the Honorable Nadia Theodore, Consul General representing Canada in Atlanta.
Thank you so much, Ida. It is a pleasure to be here. It is a pleasure to see you again. I have such fond memories of your trip to Atlanta last year and hope to welcome you back one day in the not so distant future when this pandemic is behind us. It is a pleasure for me to be part of this conversation today. Thank you so much for allowing the Consulate General to be part of this. And, you know, there are really three reasons why, for me, having this celebration and this discussion of Juneteenth amongst Canada and the United States is important. First, as you very well said it, Aita, our two countries are intertwined in ways that go deeper than just the economics. We are each other's best customers, but we also have a history of slavery, a history of emancipation, a history of culture and people-to-people ties that is unlike any two countries in the world. Second, Juneteenth is a day to be celebrated, 100%. As we know, it is the day, it celebrates and marks the day, June 19th, 1865, when the last slaves in Texas got word that they had been emancipated. And I think that celebrating where we have come is important. Celebrating the accomplishments of Black Canadians and Black Americans is important. But thirdly, and perhaps most importantly for me, I really hope that this conversation today is part of what will become the important work beyond celebrating, beyond commemoration, and towards Black people in Canada and the United States having seats at all tables. More importantly, having influence and power at those seats. Not being afraid to walk out in the world as yourself, to be held up in high regard around the world as ourselves. That is my dream for Canada. It is my dream for America. It is my dream for the world. And I know that the discussion today in celebration of Juneteenth will be one step, one small thing that we can do towards that dream. So thank you very much. I will be listening to the conversation intently, and I know I will be inspired by all of the guests. Thank you very much again, and happy Juneteenth.
Thank you, Honorable Nadia Theodore, for your greetings and your remarks in setting the tone for the day. And we are very pleased to have you as our guest. This is a big moment for us here at the People's Residence in Toronto. But we have some other two fabulous guests joining us. And I'm going to start with Toronto. And I want to tell my American guests, the weather is American weather. We have sunshine today. There is no snow today. It's all sunshine on Juneteenth. So it is all good. And I'm going to start with Dean Dori Tunstall. And Dean Elizabeth Dori Tunstall is a design anthropologist, researcher, academic leader, writer, and educator. She is the Dean of the Faculty of Design at OCAD University. That's the Ontario College of Art and Design here in Toronto, Canada. And she is the first Black Dean of a Faculty of Design anywhere. Let me just repeat that, anywhere. That sounds really big, but it's a little sad, right? But anywhere. We're really proud of her, and I must tell the world that when she came to Canada, she brought a gift to Canada. Sorry, America, that you lost her, but she brought a gift to Canada. And also too, when she came to Toronto, she hit the ground, and boy, did she do her reconnaissance and just got busy. So we are very thrilled. She's interested in human values and design as a manifestation of those values. She suggests values like equality, democracy, fairness, integration, and connection are values that to some extent we've lost, and design can help make those values more tangible and ultimately express how we can use them to make a world a better place. So to Dean Dori Tunstall, not a stranger to any of us here in Toronto, big welcome to you this morning. And then I'm going to the other Canadian who America lost, and this is Rita Deverell. Rita Deverell is, again, Shelton Deverell is no stranger to us here in Canada. She's a Canadian television broadcaster. And I remember when I was younger, that was like yesterday, I was so excited to see a Black woman on television. Oh my God, all natural. And boy, did she come with game. She's also a social activist and one of the founders of the Canadian television channel Vision TV. She also served as news director for the Aboriginal News Television. And I must say, recently too, she published and she wrote a book called American Refugees Turning to Canada for Freedom, University of Regina Press. Rita Deverell is a household name in Canada, and I am very pleased to welcome her today to this podcast. Welcome, Rita. And then we are going now to America, to a place that everybody, the name of this institution is often on our lips. I think through the lens of a different world, some of the essence of institutions like that came into the comfort of our homes. And I'm going to now introduce another mighty individual, Makeba Dixon-Hill. And Makeba Dixon-Hill has served as the Curator of Education at the Spelman College Museum of Fine Arts since 2012, citing one of the most significant aspects of her job as connecting people to resources that support them in achieving their dreams. She's responsible for interpreting the museum's collection and exhibitions into diverse interdisciplinary experiences. She's developed signature programs that amplify the voices of those committed to art by and about Black women all over the world. Please join me in welcoming Makeba Dixon-Hill to the People's Residence podcast. Good morning and welcome to you, my sister.
Thank you so much.
And now I'm going to go to my final guest, a man that I have a little bragging rights that I have met him in Toronto. And his name is Bryant McBride. And Bryant McBride builds businesses at the intersection of sports, technology, and media. Whenever I have read about Bryant McBride, it starts with, I am a builder. And right now the world is under construction, so we need builders. Bryant's entrepreneurial track record over 20 years is netting investors. He is in the world of finance, and he founded a company called Burst. Bryant also produced, and the first time to promote the messages in his acclaimed documentary, Willie, about the first Black player in the NHL. He enjoys mentoring. He is smart and he is relentless, and he is a builder. A very good morning to you, Makeba, to Bryant, to Dori, and to Rita. Very warm welcome to all of you this morning. So my first question to all of you, when you woke up this morning and that alarm clock went off and a song popped into your head, what song popped into your spirit as you thought about Juneteenth and waking up in the morning and the world that we are in? What was that song? And I'm going to start with Makeba.
All right, let's get it. I woke up with actually Sounds of Blackness in my head, and this is a choir that is based in Minneapolis. And during these times, we've been seeing a lot of memes that said the only person that knew that the revolution would start in Minneapolis was Prince. And I would also add Sounds of Blackness, growing up, hearing their voices, and really having this deep connection to their African roots and using sound as a ministry. And one of those songs that is etched into my memory is that song that goes, as long as you keep your head to the sky, you can win. That refrain was something that really put me in the spirit of what is so special about this moment of jubilation, celebration, and radical imagination that kind of comes with what happens when you see yourself alive, surviving, thriving, and in the future.
Thank you. Now I am going to go to Bryant. What song popped into your head?
Song that popped into my head, and I think starts to capture the essence of Juneteenth, is the welcome table. I'm going to sit at the welcome table. It's an old spiritual that that really is aspirational, and it speaks to you know, a yearning. You know, it was sung. It's been sung for more than 100 years. And it speaks to a yearning to belong. It speaks to a yearning to be heard. It speaks to a yearning for equity. It speaks as a yearning to be better and to do better, to treat everyone and to welcome everyone around that table. There's one verse in it in particular that's always struck me, and that is, you know, I'm gonna tell God how you treated me. Right? I think the world is opening up and waking up to accountability and to empathy. The year 2020, I think, will be remembered as the year of empathy. Certain places where there's lack of empathy, and I think coming through COVID and together, and everyone, you know, having to sacrifice and help each other. That empathy that was lacking in certain places has been spread far and wide across communities. So it's a big table, and it's, you know, it's exciting that people are starting to welcome more and more people to that table.
Okay, thank you for that. Rita, what is that song that was in your heart this morning and in your spirit when you thought of, I'm waking up and it's Juneteenth?
Not a song, a play. And my play. I'm going to snatch the day. I am from Texas. I am from Houston. I was born in Houston Negro Hospital in 1945. The Juneteenth is mine. I will never adjust to August 1st, although I'm very happy to celebrate. The Juneteenth is mine. So when I had my last big broadcasting job, I'm 60 years old at this point, and I said, I want to get back into theater. How am I going to do that? Who is going to hire a Black woman who hasn't been doing this for 30 years? The answer is nobody. I'd better write my own play. So this is 2005. And I do write my own play. It's called Smoked Glass Ceiling. And every scene of the play takes place on the Juneteenth. That's the way I've structured the play. So I'm going to actually read you just a tiny amount. This is from scene 2, June 19th, 1951. On the 19th of June each year, I ask, how far have I come from slavery? How far? For a long time after I left Houston in 1962, my father would ask anxiously on the Juneteenth, baby, do you know what day it is? He thought, I guess, that things had changed so much in his lifetime, Daddy was 93 when he died, that I could not remember. But I do remember what it was like before the civil rights movement. So every scene of the play, and there are maybe 15 scenes, takes place on a different 19th of June in my life. It is my Emancipation Day.
And you're claiming that. This is fantastic. I know sometimes people say, you know, why is a Different Booklist Cultural Centre celebrating or recognizing or commemorating Juneteenth? And I'm going to, when I walk by 691 Markham Street, which is located near the center, the cultural center. There is a home, 691 Markham Street, and a woman called Deborah Brown. She died in 1898, and she came through the Underground Railroad movement. And I'm going to, when I pass that house tomorrow, I'm going to report to her spirit that today I had the opportunity to speak to you, but also to that Rita claimed her spot. Rita Deverell claimed her spot this morning. So thank you though, Rita, for that memory and that context. And now I'm going to go to Dean Dori and to tell me, what was that song in your spirit this morning when you woke up?
So for me, it was Nina Simone's I Ain't Got No, I Got Life. And partly when I think of Juneteenth and what we're celebrating the fact that, you know, as Black folks, a lot of times we don't have a lot. A lot of times we have, like, you know, I got no money, I got no home, I got no shoes, I have no class. But what we have is we have our bodies. You know, I have my fingers, I have my legs, I have my feet, I have my toes, I got life. And by having our life, we have freedom. And so this morning, every morning I post, right? All the month of June, I've been posting things that people should be reading to understand Black life, and then things that people should be listening to, because it's, you know, National Black Music Month as well. And for me, you know, I chose the Underground Railroad as the book to read this morning. And then I had Nina Simone in my head. I ain't got no, but I got life, right? And I got freedom. And that's what Juneteenth is all about, is that regardless of what we don't have, what we have consistently fought for and what we continue to fight for on the streets today is our freedom. And that's what we got. We got life.
Yeah. So there's so much debate oftentimes. Do we celebrate Juneteenth? Do we commemorate it? Do we recognize it? Are we emancipated? Are we liberated? These are things in the diaspora that we constantly contend with, discuss among ourselves, argue about, all of those things. So here we are in 2020, in a whole new world, in two pandemics, in a perfect storm. Some people even suggest that. Things that have changed the world, cleaned up the world, and erased the world. Over the course of history, we have seen many movements. We've seen the Black Reconstruction. We've seen affirmative action. We've seen the Civil Rights Movement, so many movements. But here we are now, seeing another wave and a movement which is fueled with the expression Black Lives Matters, a movement where we see young people in their diversity on the streets demanding change. Again, another movement. My question is, how can we sustain this momentum right now? And will this momentum be fleeting? And how can we ensure that the progress that we are making right now is something that will be permanent, it will be tangible, we can see concrete results in our action, in activism. And I want you to speak to this question from your various places in life, whether it's in the place of Spelman, the college, in education, OCAD and education, and Bryant, into your context, your work with the National Hockey League, Rita, your space as a journalist and now a playwright, navigating that space. So how do we ensure that the momentum that we are building now is something that will be permanent and tangible? And like all the other movements that we've seen, while we gained some levels of success, we, however, see that we have more people in prison, our education systems have deteriorated, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to go to you, Bryant McBride, to give the first answer to this question.
Sure, I'll do my best. It's a big and critically important question.
Right.
Um, I started in early in my career. I was vice president of business development at the National Hockey League, the first Black executive to work there. And the sport is so predominantly white. I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and never had a teammate of color, and that bothered me for a very long time. So when I found myself at the table at the NHL with decision makers, I was Gary Bettman's seventh hire, um, to his credit. And I said, I have to do something. It was instilled very early in me by my mom and my dad. If you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. I think that awakening has happened and is happening around on the streets around the world right now. You know, precipitated by the events in Minneapolis by George Floyd and his murder in broad daylight in the middle of the day for all to see. So now that that event, is it in vain or not? And I strongly and emphatically say it was not in vain, and it won't be in vain. We set out to build programs at the National Hockey League that were inclusive, and that torch is being carried now by a brilliant woman um, named Kim Davis, who is eyes on the prize. We wanted to, in parallel, accentuate the work that is being done there to make the game more inclusive, both for women. It's not just along racial lines, but for women, for LGBTQ, or for everyone, to make the game discrimination free. And we needed. I'm in the business of scale. I build media and technology companies, and scale is really important towards success in that endeavor. So I'm not a movie maker, but I became one at the urging of my partner, Laurence Mathieu Legere, brilliant filmmaker in New York City. And this film was conceived when I told her the story of Willie O'Ree, and she did not know it. She's from Montreal. She was a bit ashamed not to know it, but she suggested very quickly, we need to make this film. And that discussion happened about 2 blocks away from Langston Hughes. Used to hold court in Harlem. I have a place I'm lucky enough to have a place in Harlem. So this film was born in Harlem. Lots of roots, lots of Canadian roots, but lots of cross-border collaboration to make it happen. And it was built for scale. It was built to be able to begin conversations about race for educators, to be able to talk openly and constructively about race with children. We entered and we were lucky enough to finish second at the Hot Docs Film Festival in Toronto. Amazing team of people there. They chose us as one of the films to create a curriculum around, and because they saw special value in teaching children through Willie's lessons. And if you've ever met Willie or have the opportunity, it's one of the highlights of your life. He's one of the most amazing, gracious people that you'll ever meet, humble in your life, and that needed to be spread. That message needed to be spread at scale. So we, as well as doing deals with ESPN and NBC, and it'll soon be on other large streaming services across Canada, we've taken that curriculum that the folks at Hot Docs created in conjunction with the Ontario government, and we've concluded deals with 12,000 schools across the United States. This is a sports film. This is a social justice film, excuse me, disguised as a sports film. Sports is the hook. It's just the lure to be able to have people openly and constructively talk about race. And I hope that adds some small part to a larger effort that is, you can just feel the momentum here in the United States. People are upset. People are angry. We're still in the anger phase, but we're heading towards the sustainability phase. A brilliant lawyer that has been a friend forever, Lauren Bernardi in Mississauga, she works deeply, her law firm works deeply on sexual harassment issues in the workplace. And she sent me something recently that really struck me. It was a report by the EEOC in the United States. And the report channeled the 30 years of just missteps of solving sexual harassment in the workplace. And it really, we now have to get to that point of tactics. the things that the Green Dot team is doing. If you look up Green Dot, it's a brilliant organization. It's empowering the bystander to say something and do something to eliminate sexual harassment. But I think there are lessons there that can be applied to, in my case, in the hockey world, where the bystander who hears or sees something ugly says something, creating a new norm, positive deviance, right? Deviating from the norm in a positive way. So there are building blocks that are being put in place right now that that we're going to ensure. We're not going to hope anymore. Hoping, hope is not a strategy. It's time to affect it.
I particularly like the fact that you say, if you see something, say something, because oftentimes in the stands in hockey arena, the fans can also, incite such racist incidents and commentary to Black players. And I'm very pleased that you're thinking that let's approach curriculum and embed our narrative, because we have to have the narrative of the lion. It can't be always written by the narrative of the hunter.
Very well said.
Going to now go to Dean Dori and to get your thinking into what change, how can we institutionalize some of the changes that we're seeing in the world?
Well, one of the things that we've just done right now at OCAD is we've had our Black cluster hire, where in the faculty of design, we have not had Black faculty for 144 years of the institution. Starting August the 1st, we'll have 5 new Black faculty members. And it's, that's, and the whole point of doing it is that we need a critical mass that we've had in the past, where you bring in one person, they get worn down and worn out. So to be able to really make change, we've been embarking on bringing critical mass. 2 years before, we had an Indigenous cluster hire that brought in, for the faculty of design, we went from having 0 to 3 Indigenous faculty members just within 1 year. That's the part of just getting the level of representation and representation high enough so that people feel they can speak out, right? That we can get people to the table, but if it's only one of you, you can be drowned out by the rest of the conversation. So bringing that critical mass so that those voices can be amplified within the institution, that you can back each other up at different levels of the institution, is really, that's systematic change, right? Like, they're not gonna be able to go back to having 0 Black faculty members, because there's too many, right? There's too many for them to be able to go back. The other thing is that also, at every point, like where I'm positioned in the institution, like I'm at the table of influence, I'm at the table of power, right? And so part of it is really owning that power, because most of the time when you're on the side of being often abused by power, you have a discomfort, right, with taking the power of your position. And so getting over that and knowing that actually I am the institution, I can't complain about the institution, I actually am the institution. And thus in that space, I need to claim that institutional power on behalf of those who are marginalized, on behalf of those who can be victimized by a decision that the institution is really important in terms of bringing about structural change. And then rewriting the rules. Like, in our Black cluster hire, the 2 things that I'm most proud of in that is that we rewrote the job descriptions in such a way that it said, your lived experience as a Black person matters, and we will value that in completion when you bring that into the institution. So we're not looking for a graphic designer, we're not looking for an illustrator, we're looking for someone who's interested in hip hop aesthetics. We're interested in someone who is looking at speculative Black futures. The things that, what matters to you matters to us in the institution, and we're valuing that as the job that you're coming in with to do with our community. The second thing that we did is we rewrote the rules of excellence. So we said, okay, we have this idea of like, there's a traditional academic and you perform all these things, you do conference papers, you get grants, you have all these things. Now, how are you going to do that if you've had systematic exclusion from the institution for 144 years? You're not going to have that profile. So let's say you can achieve excellence but you've achieved it in other ways. So we created a profile of like, well, what if you are a praxis star? Like you've brought this thing community, you've like worked really, really hard in your profession. You're killing it there. It just doesn't look like this academic profile, but you're doing the same things. You're giving industry talks. You're having, you're writing large commissions and things for clients to pay for you. It's the same as writing a grant. And then we said, but that's not the only profile. You have a community connector. So these are the people who are in the community organizations, people like you, Aika, right? Who've been about community and been very successful in community. And again, you have workshops, you have symposiums, you do reports, you write government grants, all these things that, again, we value in the institution in an academic form. But if you're not part of that institution, you've done all of that in a different form. And that's the standard now. Like when we go for all of our jobs, when we're looking at people, when we're looking at diversity, we're like, you can have 1 or 3 profiles of excellence to be able to enter into this institution, understanding that, like, again, you can't have this profile if we've excluded you for 144 years. So these are just 2 things of many, many things we had to do in the institution to bring about change, but that's structural. That's redefining the rules of excellence. That's redefining who we're looking for and what we're looking for from them in terms of not just some skills that we can extract from them, but your entire lived experience and how your lived experience informs those skills and your commitment to community. And then in every other meeting that I'm in, every other committee I'm in, I'm like, is this going to exclude people? Because we're going to rewrite that policy. Is this going to be a barrier? Let's rewrite this policy. So in every single time that we're in the room, bringing our community in the room and what impact that decision is going to have, that's how you bring the systematic change.
Thank you for your words. And it's really important to let the world know that the efforts that you spoke of took place prior to COVID, which only illustrates the point that when we have representation in institutions, and that representation is courageous to redefine policy or to insist on representations within the institutions, how significant or what progress can be made. So, and then the other thing that is important to mention here too, Dori, is that the individuals in those institutions, as community, we must be able to protect them and to strengthen them and to support them because they are vulnerable in their advocacy on behalf of us. So thank you for that and exciting news at OCAD. And so Makeba Dixon-Hill, all the way in Spelman, what is your moment and what are your thoughts of where that permanent concrete change can take place and we can hold on to?
Thank you so much for that question. And it becomes something that feels very affirming to the work that I do because I'm at an institution that centers Black women. So with that as being at the center of the work that we do and working at an institution that is using the visual aesthetic as a means to edify, inspire, and support, that's something that we kind of wake to every day. And so I love the way when Bryant was bringing up curriculum as a component of the systematic change and the momentum. There are 2 particular programs that I want to uplift right now, and it's all connected to how this particular college is a liberal arts institution. So it's in many ways amplifying interdisciplinary inquiry and study. And so with that, you look at things in a holistic perspective. And when we're talking about where we've been, where we want to be in the current state of things, it comes up with this quote from a dear friend, Tanika Williams, that says, whole systems problems require whole system solutions. And with that in mind, there is a program called African Diaspora in the World, ADW as we call it internally. And it is a kind of thinking about your core first year program. So in this 2-semester, 1-year program, students are walking into a introduction to what it is being a Black person living in America and living in the world. So it's giving you this diverse curriculum taught by professors that are from all departments. So you may have a chemistry teacher teaching this course. You may also have a professor in history to really kind of think about these different ways that you can access and engage freedom, access and engage agency. And in addition to that, the school has been putting a lot of emphasis on global travel. And so with that, there's this moment of when we exist in silos, sometimes you have to be shown rather than told. So we want to work with both of those working together. And I love, in conversation with Dean Dori, this opportunity around supporting and nurturing and protecting people. Those are one of those things that I think comes with going to an HBCU, historically Black college or university. There's this way where a familial bond kind of gets integrated into the academic experience, where safety, where camaraderie, and in Spelman's case, sisterhood becomes a little bit of the thread that we weave throughout the practice of learning. And we really kind of see that as a practice in the same way that you're looking at yourself as an artist. The way you have to show up, there's a practice of building community. And I think that that's essential. And building power for yourself. So not moving away from not thinking of ourselves in this way of white skin and Black mask, you know, this way of really looking at what does power really mean and how can you use your education to weld that into some type of independent community building practices, not just walking away with a certificate.
I thank you for that, Makeba, and also I thank you too for the point that you make about our global awareness and knowing more than outside of ourselves and the holistic approach to things. And you raised something that I'm going to come back to, which would lead us into my next question. But before I go to that, Rita, give me your thoughts on how do we hold on and maintain some of this momentum that we are seeing right now?
In one word, alliances. And I'm going to give you more than one word, though. Last night, I was in a forum like this, only bigger, at Lakehead University in Aurelian. And this had been organized by students who are concerned about inclusivity and diversity. So there were Indigenous students, there were Black students, there were international students, there was faculty. And I told them a major change that I see, since I'm really old. I went west for the first time in 1971. And the good news about that is that I was going west because I had been hired by the Globe Theater in Regina to be an actor on their school tour. And this was before people here in the center of the universe, Ontario, had discovered non-traditional casting and colorblind casting and blah, blah. This theater in Saskatchewan hired me. That was great. That was the good news. The bad news was people in Regina would keep coming up to me and saying, "We're not racist." And I couldn't figure out why they were saying this. The reason they were saying it is this was very close to 1968, when there had been all kinds of protest because of the murder of Martin Luther King. And so they were very aware of anti-Black racism. And they would tell me they weren't racist. What they didn't notice is that they were horribly racist about Indigenous peoples. They didn't even see this. It was in the air. It was the way they lived on the prairies. So now we know this. There is this alliance. Dori was talking about it in terms of OCAD. You see this first. So these students that I was meeting with last night, they've got this. And that's how we're going to keep things going.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for, again, bringing back into the conversation student voice and also to this dynamic that we are seeing around young people. I'm going to reference or something that Makeba said. And one of the things that we're conscious of, I remember when I watched Al Sharpton's moment of 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I remember thinking when he went into that moment, oh my gosh, in broadcast, you know, there's no radio silence or television silence. This is a huge moment that the world is watching. And I remember in that moment, in my 8 minutes standing with my family watching this thing, thinking, we have had the Pan-Africanism movement, that global movement where we had the Du Bois, where we had people out of Trinidad and Tobago, when we had Nkrumah in Ghana, and on and on and on and on. But suddenly we are at a moment too in our history, sometimes where we feel that America speaks to itself. So my question is, what can the diaspora of African people, what can the Caribbean nation, what can the nations on the continent of Africa, how do they support African Americans? Oftentimes, it is the perception that Africa America helps the world. We see your movements and we are inspired by them. But at the same time, in the diaspora, there are so many Caribbean-led movements and movements out of the continent. But again, I stood there and I thought, Africa America seems to need the help of the diaspora. We need to seem to be in more conversation as people in the diaspora. So my question to all of you, because you are African Americans, how can the diaspora be involved in the support of what is taking place in America? And I think yesterday I saw a headline somewhere that said, African nations on the continent are softening their stance about the racism taking place in America. And in that moment, I thought about our role in erasing apartheid. That took a global expression of people. So my question is, how can the diaspora become part of the conversation or support the movements that are taking place in America? And I'm not going to call you like roll call now. I'm going to let that spirit bring you to the platform and speak to the people. Rita?
Well, since my microphone is still on, I guess I should talk. By knowing it is your responsibility to do that. By knowing, and this has been referenced a couple of times, how much power we have. Never disclaim the power we have. I was very moved that the morning of George Floyd's funeral in Houston, where I am from, and we both went to Jack Yates Senior High School, that Texas Southern University, the Black university, across the street from where George Floyd grew up, gave his 6-year-old daughter a full tuition scholarship and said, this won't replace your father, but it will make your passage in life easier. And I think that's absolutely true. George Floyd never managed to cross that street from CUNY Homes to the projects, in the projects to Texas Southern University. Maybe his daughter will be able to do that. But the university at that point had to recognize it had the power to give her that. We've all got to recognize our power. We are a very privileged group of people. And there are lots of privileged people who are called upon at this moment to recognize their power in the diaspora and use it.
Something that comes to mind for me is also asylum. Talking to a collective of women last week, there was a conversation around feeling afraid in their home country. And there are these moments about where we realize as members of this particular diaspora, we got people. And I think there are several steps that are a part of that. First, getting to know each other. I love when Nadia was speaking earlier and mentioned that we're not distant cousins. This conversation between Canada and the United States, as we, the 50 states that we occupy, that we are a part of a family. And I think when there's this division that is motivated by colonialism, motivated by the media and a host of other misconceptions, that the opportunity to get to know each other in order to forge those particular alliances are of paramount importance, because I think that we're at a point, just like with what was happening with Juneteenth happening, there was an invitation to reimagine the world as you like to see it. And so in this moment of thinking about deepening pre-existing relationships with our brothers and sisters and all over the world that are part of the diaspora, to forge these types of real relationships that we can gather together, build together across borders, and to really kind of decide and draw our own. I think that is something that would be greatly appreciated by the people that are in my home country right now.
I guess for me, what I say is like, and maybe it's because I travel so much around the world, that I see those alliances have established and been established for a really, really long time. I mean, yesterday, my book of the day was The Book of Negroes by Lawrence Hill. And again, like, this is a story of coming from Africa, moving involuntarily to the States, coming from the States to Canada, coming from Canada to Liberia, coming to Liberia back to Canada. And so again, I think, the transatlantic slave trade had already established all of those relationships and all of those links. And again, if you look at all of the social movements, especially the ones in the 60s, we were all supporting each other. Like, I've been to Australia, and for me to go all the way to Australia, where the indigenous people, again, they're categorized and self-identify as Black, and that you had the Black Panther movement that was in Australia. You had, even before that, you had Marcus Garvey movement back in Australia. So we've always been supporting each other in our liberation struggles. And this is reflected in, like, the music that we share. We share our music, like the way in which hip hop is a global language of community reporting and a global language of the fight for liberation in many ways. Like, that, again, that didn't just come from the United States. Like, the whole sound system came from Jamaica, right? So there's a way in which we've been deeply implicated in each other's struggles for a really long time. The divisions that exist are just the divisions that are in some ways perpetrated by the media to try to show that there is these separations. But if you look at the details and you trace, like, the connections of the leaders, if you look at the rank and file and you do the sort of analysis of where they all come from, like, again, the whole Africa and its diaspora was all there. We've always been there for one another in one way or another, right? And it's only the way in which it gets described and written, and the way in which, again, the story doesn't get told by us in many ways, that we have that perception that we haven't been working together. But again, I live in Toronto, and like it's a thing where people have their differences, but we all work together. Like everyone is on the street of Toronto together. Like it doesn't matter, that we all recognize our commonality in our struggle, our commonality in our colonization, and we're all there together because we realize, like, again, all we have is each other. That's all we have, that's all we can rely upon is each other. And we do. Like, again, we're in Haiti was the first nation, Black nation, to claim its independence. And that set off a whole series of rebellions, not just in the Caribbean, but in the United States and other places as well. So we've always been connected to one another and connected to one another's struggle, because we see, like, since that first ship arrived, the European ship arrived in Africa and said, we're gonna take some of your people and we're gonna bring them to other places, we realize, like, again, we're part of each other's struggle.
I would add to that. Aita, you mentioned apartheid and the worldwide collective to echo what Dori is saying. That's what it took, right? That's what it took in a very concerted way. And this system that we are speaking of and that people are straining under and pushing back on, you know, in a very concerted way, it was built with intent. It was built with serious intent. You go back to the 13th Amendment, to, you know, the little clause about criminality, and you play it forward, and it's a direct line to 33%, because of the laws that are in place today. 33% of Alabamans can't vote today because they were incarcerated at some point. You know, it will take that same intent that has seeped into the cracks and the crevices, not just of this country, but worldwide, that is racism. It will take that same intent to undo it, right? To pull it out. It's woven, it's now seeped into the fabric of America in particular, but really worldwide. And it's a collective challenge across the diaspora, across all peoples, to acknowledge that. You know, in Canada, there was, I experienced for the first time sitting at hot dogs at that festival, because I'm in the US the majority of my time, just the acknowledgement of the land. That I had never heard that before. As we started today, it so struck me as like, what? I mean, that's amazing progress. Now, is it going to solve all of the issues that the indigenous peoples face? No, absolutely not. But at least it was a start. I am an outspoken advocate about truth and reconciliation in this country. You have to take a step back to go forward, acknowledging what has been done, acknowledging, you know, the wealth gap of 10x, you know, from white households to Black households, the seeds of that in the GI Bill and how it was administered. Those are all facts that people, you know, listening perhaps know and on the screen know, but most people don't know. We have to have a common reset. COVID has forced us to do that. And the disproportionate number of people, you know, BIPOC people that have been impacted by COVID has just finally forced powers that don't want to shake that or undo what has been done. It's forcing them to face it, and we are all accountable. Those stakeholders and all stakeholders are accountable to do something about that, and do something, as prior to your last question, to do something that's lasting, that's impactful, that is measurable, that is tangible, and you know, the failure to do so it's just not acceptable any longer. We're at that point where there's no going back. You can't put this genie back in the bottle. people are in the streets. People are not going to leave the streets, I think, until there are answers and a path forward that benefits everyone.
Oh, powerful, powerful. I also want you to know that your words and your efforts are not in vain. There are people who are viewing you, and here are some of their comments. Loving the discussion. Cross-border relationships are so important. Keep up the great work. And a little commentary, I'm hoping that my sister Joy Reid, I'm hoping that Don Lemon, I hope that you're watching this ADBCC, the People's Resident Moment, because one of the things that we note on all the broadcast stations is that they never reference Canada. Oh my gosh, the pandemic, you know, people would reference everywhere else in the world, but never Canada. You know, what Canadians are thinking, hello, we've got some thoughts here. And also too, we were having a moment of panic that we didn't see First Nations peoples too, and their thoughts and their opinions. So I am so pleased too that as panelists, you are bringing all these things up into the conversation. I'm particularly pleased, Dori, that you have reminded the world that we work together. The more mantra and propaganda we say to people, you don't do something, people believe it. But we work together and we work well together. We may have differences of opinion like everybody else, but we do work together. So it's really important that we affirm too in the language of our people. Yesterday, I had an opportunity to work with like 35 people out of a community, and we worked together and we worked well. And an empowering moment. Also want to mention that in Makeba's comments, she mentioned black skin, white mask, and that is also to the signature piece of Frantz Fanon, the psychiatrist, and a must read for just everybody in the world. And I'm also too pleased that this morning that you also spoke to this whole notion, because every day I see my phones blowing up and people keep asking the question, how can I be an anti-racist? You know, people are under construction and looking for the tools to build their capacity. Final question from one of our viewers. What is that book that changed your life and was a turning point in your life? Question for one of our viewers.
A book for me was, thank you, Bryant. That book for me was Robin D. Kelly's The Black Radical Imagination. I love this way of, you know, there was a moment where there was a little bit of fatigue that people were expressing around reaching to Martin Luther King Jr. as the archetype for a conversation around civil rights. And what came up was this book for me that really talked about the act of dreaming can be one of the most radical things that a Black person can do. He was specifically speaking to Black people here. And that opened up a doorway for me, and it's something that I still reach to over 15 years later.
So many, so many. But to name only one, The Bluest Eye, Toni Morrison.
For me, it's The Miseducation of the Negro by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. And I think it's because I was told that at age 6, I said I was going to be an educator. That's like apocryphal story. And so for me, it was a thing like, I love learning. Like, that's why I went into academia. I love learning. Being as a professor, you learn all the time. And it was the thing that made me pay attention to not just the process of learning, but what is being taught. What is, are you teaching freedom? Are you teaching liberation, right? Or are you teaching enslavement? So for me, that was really, that shifted my thinking about what I expect for an education for myself. And then as an educator, it drives that notion of how I educate others, right? That I'm not indoctrinating them into systems of their own enslavement, but that I'm providing them with the resources, the critical thinking, and the tools to liberate themselves from any situation of oppression.
I would education is the starting point, right? And so it's very I'm gonna expand just a little bit, and I'm gonna name four, because I recommend these four books constantly as a way. I have many friends who've said, what do I do? How do I get smarter? I said, the first thing you can do is know the history so you can speak to it. And The Warmth of Other Suns is such a familial, encompassing, beautifully written read that really, talks to the Black experience and the greatest migration in history. The Color of Law is such an encyclopedic, deep dive, brilliant, irrefutable account of how we got here. The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, really, really just, again, irrefutable. And she's just such a brilliant voice in as to the reasons why that it's just, I've watched people debate her, and it's almost comical because of her, encyclopedic and just attuned description of what happened. And of course, Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. I portend and I posit that Bryan Stevenson is the modern day MLK in a lot of ways. The work that he has done over such a period of time, I've never met him, I don't know him, so I'm not just speaking to a friend. The work at the Equal Justice Institute, at the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, it should be a mandatory visit for every American, so that they can understand and they can start to build a knowledge base of again, how we got here. I think it's critically important that these four books, they serve as foundational education and foundational elements to build on. And without that foundation, it's tough to build and erect a future that we all can partake in.
Can I jump in with a second one? There are books behind me, as has been observed. What is behind me is my mother's library, which I pretty much brought without opening from Houston when my mother passed away in 2004. During the COVID crisis, I have missed hard copy books. I have too many electronics, so I can't use my Kobo. And so I was just rummaging through the shelves 2 days ago, and I found a book from 1964. 1964, called Black and White, A Crisis. This is written by a white guy, and his analysis is, and I can't think of his name, I'm sorry, but Black and White, A Crisis, his analysis of everything is frightening in terms of how precise it is. And I'm very moved by this book.
Thank you all for sharing that. This has been a fantastic morning. We're coming into the final stretch here. I'm going to also invite Consul General Nadia Theodore back with us to share her closing remarks or a few words to us today.
I was muted, sorry. Thanks, Aita. Thank you very much. I really have nothing to add from the amazing words and inspiration from all of the panelists. I've been tweeting while you guys have been talking. But what I will say is that I feel like I am a kindred spirit with Bryant, because Bryan Stevenson is my, I hate the word idol, but idol. I will use the word. And Just Mercy, I would agree, is a must read for everybody. I say to my friends all the time that if I had all of the money in the world and all of the gumption in the world, I would quit my job and go work for the Equal Justice Initiative. So just to fully endorse all of the books that people have listed, but especially Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, a must read. So thank you very much for allowing Atlanta, Boston, Seattle, Dallas to be a part of this. Our consulates general and our consuls general are so proud to be part of this discussion. Challenge us, please, to do more as consulates general in America. We want to be challenged. We want to represent Canada in the way that we should, and be part of these very important discussions, and more importantly, these very important actions forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia, Theodore, Consul General representing Canada in Atlanta. And I must say our conversation today has been extremely rich. For those who are viewing with us today, I've had the distinct pleasure and privilege of speaking to Dean Dori Tunstall, who is the Dean of OCAD here, University in Toronto, doing exceptional work and everyday excellence at OCAD. I'm very, very pleased and privileged to have had the pleasure to speak with Makeba Dixon-Hill, who is the Curator of Education at Spelman College Museum of Fine Art, and to Bryant McBride, who seems to be no stranger to people, who is a builder. I love that, and an entrepreneur and a businessman bringing technology at the intersection of sports and other things. And as we move into a more technological world, people like Mr. McBride are going to become equally important as we also to dissect and explore racism within the technology. So I'm happy that he is on the program now, because folks like him are going to be our ambassadors and be vigilant too about the tools that will navigate us into the future. And it is always an honor to a large degree to be in the presence of Rita Deverell, our great journalist. And I have to shout out her book, American Refugees Turn into Canada for Freedom. It's by the University of Regina Press. And what we do know today, that we have evoked the spirit of the great Marcus Garvey, who didn't have Instagram, but boy, was he able to command an international platform. We've also reminded people about the spirit of Haiti and their revolution, and that their constitution said, people are equal. It was not the right to bear arms. So we are thankful for all of that. And to Makeba too, who also pointed out to us that our relationships are global and we should have further awareness. To the consular staff in Atlanta and the team there, thank you too for your efforts in helping us to coordinate this moment, and to having Nadia, Theodore, Consul General, be part of this. Go out in the world and do great things. It has been the privilege of a Different Booklist Cultural Centre, 777 Bathurst Street, the People's Residence, to have you in the comfort in the living room of people's homes. Up, you mighty race, in the words of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.